African Megaliths and Ancient Astronomy, presented by Charlie Stirton. In this lecture, Charlie introduced the continent and explored its stone circles and their astronomy, looking at the pre-dynastic peoples of ancient Africa. Recorded live at Megalithomania Conference 2007.
Last year's conference, when I attended it, I didn't even know what a megalith was. But apart from Egypt, no one seemed to mention Africa. And I was puzzled at the time, what did this mean? Did the cradle of humanity in Africa not have any megaliths? Was astronomy not important to Africans? So why this talk? I think I opened my mouth and said, why wasn't there anything on Africa? And the reply was, well, why didn't you do something on Africa? So this is a personal journey to learn about Africa's ancient astronomy. And as you probably can gather from my accent, I tend to be from that continent. So it's not original research. It's really a voyage of discovery and now sharing of where I am on this journey. I've sought evidence from history, myths, rituals, calendars, and physical artifacts. And what I found is an absolute rich and exciting information. I found that Africans did and do approach the heavens both with creativity and with intelligence. However, it's clear to me also from my reading that this evidence is not receiving the proper attention of academic archaeoastronomy. The general public is also largely unaware of Africa's rich astrological and astronomical past. Keith Snedgar from the Utah Valley State College goes as far as to say that sub-Saharan Africa is cultural astronomy's heart of darkness. I'm going to begin my talk by clarifying in my mind what a megalith is relative to this talk. Then I will explore why Africa does not seem to be a focus of interest. And the rest of the talk, I'm going to look at a number of selected case studies. Now, what's the main aim of my talk? It's really to excite you about the terrific prospects that Africa offers to those interested in megaliths and ancient astronomy. Finally, I'll draw some conclusions and some suggestions for the future. So let us begin with the megalithic context. As I said last year, I didn't know what a megalith was. Well, here are a couple of definitions. I don't expect you to read them all through. I'd like you just to look at the green highlights. Because basically, those have all the key elements which I'm going to talk about. So the focus is on large stones in Africa that may or may not be in rings and may or may not be used for the calculation of calendars, used as burial markers, or for mapping the heavens. There are a few caveats. I am going to leave out Pharaonic Egypt and the Kushite kingdoms of Sudan because these are better known. I'm going to concentrate primarily on sub-Saharan Africa, but I will make a little bit of mention about North Africa above the Sahara, particularly north-west. And I'm going to take a very broad brush approach to this immense topic. I'm going to introduce you to a few African scientists along the way who are involved with African archaeoastronomy and megalithic studies, because I'm sure you're going to be hearing about them in the future. Well, let's first look at problems of permanent records in Africa. Many African peoples, such as the Zulu, the Mande, the Bambara, the Nua, the Dogon, and Ikung societies have been intensively studied, and you probably know about them. But much of the intellectual richness of sub-Saharan cultures has been ignored and lost over the centuries. Much of the astronomical and cosmological knowledge in Africa in the past is normally transmitted during ritual initiation. But traditional societies in Africa are rapidly fragmenting. Old practices are being lost, resulting in a rapid erosion of ancient knowledge. Yves Bonnefoy has summarized the complexity well. He says, first, myth is not organized like a written text whose original version, still unaltered and true, must be determined and which is illustrated in some way by material productions. Second, that myth may be transmitted in some way other than through the spoken word. Not only masks and statuary, but also architecture, music and choreography, and even body markings are related to a coherent system of signs that explicates the meaning of myths according to the particular level attained during initiation. Now, I want to draw this thing between initiation, the transference of knowledge, and a lot of the African cosmology is tied into the whole cultural fabric. Let's look at a few problems with resources. Modern scholars have got to confront major problems when trying to establish the ancient sources of African traditions. There's a loss of sources due to human and natural intervention, ramping armies, collapse of societies, slavery, colonialism. The impact of missionaries has had a huge impact on the loss of indigenous knowledge in Africa. Many of the key objects, I'll mention the Zimbabwe birds later, have been transported to other countries, and these are power objects as well. Also, there are many undeciphered documents. Just an example, the Meroitic texts of ancient Meroe, probably predates ancient Kemet, remain undeciphered, and you can see an example here. Next. There are strange and unfamiliar systems of writing and recording. And it's only recently, in the great private libraries of Timbuktu, they found that many of the old African languages have been written, translated into Arabic, and now they've been translated out of Arabic into these old languages, and there are a lot of astronomical texts amongst them. There's also, in Africa, except for the drier sub-Saharan area, scarcity of durable building materials to build permanent monuments like we have in many other parts of the world. But even in places in the wetter tropics, there are structures. Slavery, colonial attitudes, racism have also destroyed or demeaned indigenous knowledge. And there's also a very Eurocentric view of African history, and I hope today I'm going to open up a door that shows there is an alternative approach for that. If one looks across Africa, a number of concepts and numbers stand out. But how do they link? And I'll just mention some of the key things, because I won't be able to go into them. The 4 cardinal points, the numbers 7, 60, and 266, ideographic writing, twins, 4 elements, axis mundi, and stars and the pole star. Could you go back one slide, please? One also comes across some very surprising discoveries. For example, a thread of ancient Kemetic religious beliefs exists that reaches down even to Zululand, where it's practiced as ukwazi kwezi tabango, the science which depends on thought. Very interesting topic. And it's held by a learned society who call themselves the Bona Abukulu Abase Kemu. One point is regularly overlooked: the vital importance of examining how pre-industrial societies from one end of the continent of Africa to the other determine seasonal cycles, timing of festivals and rituals, crop planting, harvesting, and mating intervals. This information is strongly embedded in traditional oral culture. Now, oral culture, this is going to come through this talk. In this slide, just to highlight the point, there's an alternative view of history of Africa and its contribution to the development of global civilization. And if many of you became aware of this literature, you'd probably be quite shocked. It's into 2 parts. The clearly imaginative, and the other which is backed by very serious and academic scholarship. Afrocentrists propose hypotheses that would challenge the ideas of many of us in this room. For example, the Olmecs were Africans. Evidence has now been collected from linguistics, sculpture, myths, paintings, and a whole range of other sources that show definitely Africans moved from Africa into Central America. A good entry point, and introducing one of the first, this is an Afro-American, but linked to Africa, Dr. Clyde Winters. The pioneer Afrocentrist was C.A. Diop, and he published a book in 1997 called The African Origin of Civilization. Next slide. Well, Here you see the night skies in Africa and Europe. The first thing that strikes you, apart from Nigeria, very populated, southern Africa, particularly the Highveld, and the rim of North Africa, Africa is dark, and Europe is light. I'll be coming back to that next, please. Africa is the second largest continent, but only has 14% of the world's population. Of these, only 1% have the internet. So this is the maximum use of internet. And when you get to dark blue, that means virtually nobody. Also want to point out, this is activity of Google mapped across the Earth, which is another way of looking at it. So you have the night skies of Africa, which are incredibly rich in stars and very clear. But in terms of our new virtual world, is virtually empty in Africa. Next, please. But it's these very dark skies that are now the focus for deep space telescopes. This new 18 million pound Southern African Large Telescope is built on a mountaintop near Sutherland in South Africa on the edge of the Kalahari Desert and opened on the 1st of September 2005. It's equal to the world's largest optical telescope. It was funded and constructed by an international consortium of universities and government agencies, mainly from South Africa, the United States, Germany, Poland, the UK, and New Zealand. This observatory provides unprecedented access to the astronomically rich skies of the Southern Hemisphere. Objects such as the large and small Magellanic Clouds, the galaxies nearest to our own Milky Way, all will come into sharp view through the concerted focus of 91 hexagonal mirror segments that comprise the Sol Telescope primary mirror array. I wonder what people will think in 2,500, 3,000 years' time about these structures. Eric Wilcox, UW-Madison professor of astronomy, said about it, "The southern Milky Way is more spectacular and provides a richer treasure trove of objects than the northern Milky Way. We are in an age in which answering the big fundamental questions requires access to large telescopes in good dark skies. SOLT is such a telescope." Now here we have this extraordinary situation. 18 million pounds has been spent on this, yet we know virtually nothing about Southern Africa's traditional knowledge of the skies. And virtually no money goes in towards funding this. And as I proceed in my talk, you'll see actually Africans know an awful lot about the skies. Next, please. South Africa's first black astronomer is Dr. Thebe Madupe, 33. He has a PhD in physics from the University of Cape Town, was the first black PhD in physics in South Africa. He's an astroseismologist, and he works at the South African Astronomical Observatory. His main research is on variable stars, but he also explores cultural astronomy and historical scientific activity in South Africa. In 2003, he fronted a documentary film called Cosmic Africa. Has anyone seen this film? One person. I'd recommend having a look at it. Madupe visited indigenous peoples across the continent to learn about the form and significance that astronomy takes in their lives and in their cultures. His own life is very rich in star lore. He tells a story he learned from his grandfather. He learned about a very bright star called Naka, the horn star. We know it now as Canopus. The Tswana people used cow horns to herald its first sighting, which marked the beginning of winter. It also marked the time for young boys to leave their parents and begin their ritual initiation. His latest project involves scouring ancient manuscripts from Timbuktu. You can see an example here. Here's one, a treatise on astronomy and optics. Most of these manuscripts are virtually unknown in the West. They're virtually all in Arabic, and there's some very exciting finds that are going to come out there, and a couple of international organizations. These are all held in private homes where people have been custodians of these books for nearly 1,000 years. Very exciting. I wish I could talk about that for ages. Next, please. Now, Do any of you know about Marupeng? Show of hands? No? Marupeng is a Tswana word which means returning to the place of our origins. It's in South Africa, 100 acres, and it overlooks the magnificent Magaliesberg and Witwatersrand mountain ranges and is en route to the popular resort of Sun City. In case some of you have been to Sun City, you would have passed on the way. Major new visitor attraction in South Africa, and it tells the stories of the evolution of life and the origin of mankind. It denotes the universal relevance of the cradle of humankind as the ancestral home of us all, no matter what color, culture, or creed. However, it doesn't relate these origins to the night sky or show the link from the past to the present. So there's some real opportunities there. Next, please. Recent events show that many Africans are fascinated by the night sky. Thousands of people in southern Africa watched the first total solar eclipse of the new millennium. People as far as Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi and Mozambique saw the skies go dark before the eclipse finally ended over Madagascar. There was such a festive spirit in Zambia that they declared it a national holiday. The longest view was in Libya, 4 minutes, 7 seconds, and it was at Nabu settlement near the Chadian border. That's 2,000 kilometers south of Tripoli. 12,000 tourists from 20 countries and 20,000 Libyans trekked out there and to 2 other visiting spots. What motivated them? Next, please. We have lost the art of geomancy. Many modern people have lost their intimate connection with the earth and would consider being in harmony with the planet as an esoteric concept. Our modern technical civilization has a philosophy of domination with the natural environment. We have lost the practice of geomancy. Our ancestors understood and used the properties of the earth. Geomancy is the science of putting human habitats into harmony with visible and invisible world around us. Next. It also underlines the divinatory practices of I Ching, astrology, tarot, Malgash Sikidi, Sai-Che, Kang-Che, astrology, and a whole range of others. The patterns fall out in divination according to the universe at that moment, and so we're believed to be a significant reflection of the current states. It's a key to the past as well as a gateway today to inner knowledge. Some other examples next. You may be familiar or heard about mirror scrying, crystal scrying, Delphic syllables. Shamanism is probably what most people would know. Next, please. But divination is still widely practiced in many parts of the world. It's very strong in Africa. And this is really important to trying to understand how it's linked in to their understanding of the stars and the heavens. In African societies, an understanding of the heavens and their role in the world is deeply intermeshed with traditional belief systems, some of which are on spectrum remarkably familiar. I'll give you some examples. Here are a few examples from Mali, the Dogon I'll talk a bit more about, and the Tswapong. The Zulus, many others haven't. I'll just look at one example. Next, please. Yeah, that's the one. The Uhobo people of the southern Nigerian Delta, they recognize the existence of a dual cosmological system, the spirit world and the physical world. That's very familiar. It's believed that everyone in the physical world has a replica in the spiritual world, and that these two worlds have great influence over one another. Power, however, seems to be in the hands of the spirits, who are constantly making demands on it and causing problems for the living, who in turn must appease the spirits through sacrifice. Every 10 years, the Uhoba hold a large masquerade ceremony for the entire community to honor the spirits. It's also associated with the ceremony of rebuilding the shrines and 277 days, which are linked to their calendar, etc. We don't have time to go into that. Next, please. Here's an example of their divination. They have these 4 necklaces with a flat side, a convex and a concave side. One's dark and one's white. They then call the spirits using this tapper, and then they throw them, and according to the ratios of light and dark, they have a whole complicated language that explain. This is one of the most essential religious practices amongst them. It's an important element in the sacred duties because the devotee is always eager to know the wishes of the divine. Next, please. I'm not going to dwell long on this table. I just want to point out how much we have in common with Africans. The green column here is something familiar to all of you. It's the chakra, crown, third eye, all the way down to the root. On the right, we have the Yoruba and the Zulus, and their divisions are the 7 divisions of the spirit. Starting from the physical body, I'll just do the Zulus, Umzimba, Isutunzi, the etheric, the Amandla, the life force, the Utiwesilo, planes of the mind which manifest as passions, emotions, instincts, Utiwamuntu, manifest consciousness, intellect, high emotions, Utiwengo, spiritual consciousness, and Itongo, which is the universal spirit. The cosmology of both these people is very deep and is as complex as anything that came out of Egypt. Next, please. Celestial bodies, the sun, moon, planets, and stars, have provided us with a reference for measuring passage of time throughout our existence. Of course, ancient civilizations relied on this, as we've seen in the previous talk, determined seasons, months, and years. Many of you will agree with Jean Fernald when he said, "Contemplation of the stars and heavenly bodies excites such wonder and charm in the human mind that once fascinated by it, we are caught in the toils of an enduring and delighted slavery which holds us in bondage," and here we are today. As a child growing up in the vast open spaces of Africa's dark night skies, I was fascinated by the night sky and was gripped by how it was imaged by different peoples. For example, I learned from the Bushman or the Khoisan that the stars were campfires of the departed ancestors. The Amazulu depiction of dawn and dusk as the white bull of day fighting the black bull of night, and the red was all the blood that was spilled. It is only now far removed from my childhood that I realized how much I knew about the South African skies and how virtually ignorant I am about the northern ones. The northern sky is a mystery to me, and not something I intuitively relate to, as my axis mundi is down in the south. But how little did I know about the night skies of Africa and how the ancients interpreted them. Next, please. Like nearly everyone in this room, I have a sense of the grandeur of the monumental megalithic sites of Stonehenge in Britain and Karnak in France. I stand in awe of the ingenuity of these structures and what they may represent. There's someone born in Africa. It's the enigmatic African megaliths that attract me more deeply. I would now like to turn your gaze to an African megalithic site that predates Stonehenge. Next, please. Of course, I refer to Nabta Playa. Next, please. Nabta Playa is 60 miles near the Egyptian-Sudanese border, just to place you in the top part of Africa. Next, please. This is the oldest astronomically aligned structure on the planet. 1,000 years older, but comparable to Stonehenge. It's in a natural depression with an area of about 5,000 square kilometers. Until roughly 11,000 years ago, the wide plains of Nabta Playa were too dry to support permanent human settlement. But by then, the weather started changing, and scientists think that the summer monsoons of Central Africa started to move northwards, creating large temporary lakes or playas. Next, please. So humans have occupied the area for about 11,000 years until about 4,800 years ago. So the megalithic structures are 7,000 to 6,000 years, so late Neolithic period. If anyone misses anything, they can see me afterwards to get any details of references or anything like that. Next, please. Just a general map of the area. There are a whole range of tumuli with cattle burials. They tended to worship cattle. Was a cattle economy. There's a megalithic alignment over here. There's a calendar circle over here. But the area still is hardly explored. Next, please. It's quartzite sandstone. It came from an exposed sandstone that was at least half a kilometer away. The stones themselves are 6 foot wide by 9 feet high, but they also vary. They are vertical stones. They cast no shadow when the sun passes directly overhead and mark the zenith passage every year, 3 weeks before and after the solstice. May signal the onset of the summer monsoons. Next, please. There are 5 known alignments of megaliths, stretching out from a group of central megalithic structures of the settlement. And here's just a map. There's a line of sight, this way and that way. The lines are very closely matched to the direction of sunrise on the summer solstice, as well as the rising points of Sirius, Dubhe, and Orion's belt. Next, please. I'd now like to move on to the Borana calendar and the dancing stones of Namorotunga. Next, please. It was Legesse who first recorded in 1973 that the Borana of the Kushite people had a unique calendrical system. 10 years later, Lynch and Robbins put forward initial arguments that the pillars were astronomically aligned. Over the years, the measurements and alignments of the pillars have been measured and remeasured. The pillars today are thought to be aligned to the 7 stars whose position in the sky mark the months when they rise at the same position on the horizon with the phases of the moon. Next, please. There are 19 pillars at Namorotunga, which means stone people. And the dancing of the stone people is linked to their creation myth. Hieroglyphs on the pillars, very similar to those there, are very similar to modern cattle brands used by the Turkana, and they are also the same as on burial sites 100 kilometers south. Each pillar has its own unique name, and it matches the dominant clan names of the leading families. Note also the stones put on these pillars here. The story is that guides recommend people to leave that there as an offering. But I want to challenge that. I think that there's something more significant about that, and it's very old because I'll show you an example right on the other side of Africa, which predates that. Next, please. This map just shows the arrangements of the pillars. Next, please. Right, slightly complicated, but don't worry too much. The red dots represent pillars, and these are all the different potential alignments. Legesse said the Borana calendar uses 6 star positions marked by 7 star or star groups. The 7 stars or star groups are in order: Triangulum, the Pleiades, Aldebaran, Bellatrix, Orion, Siph, and Sirius. In 1983, an expedition to the site by Soper, Doyle, and Edward Frank found there were 25 two-pillar alignments with the 300 BCE eastern rising positions of the Borana calendar stars, direct correlation to 300 BC. It seemed they also, to prove the alignments were not random, they generated 10,000 random star alignments, and only 0.41% of them had 25 or more random alignments. Seems highly likely that the alignments were not random. They also showed the pillars were magnetic. I don't know what the significance of that. I do remember as a child in Africa, coming across the Ubomba Mountains when I was botanizing, the car just came to a halt. All the machinery died, all our watches died, our radio died, and there are huge mountains of magnetites. And when I asked locals there, they said, no, nobody goes there. The star watchers live there. And I've just thought about that now. I hadn't thought about that in all that time. 1998, Bassi showed that the modern calendar works a bit differently from the ancient one, because obviously the skies have shifted a bit. Next, please. Now, the Borana calendar is a lunar stellar calendrical system. It relies on astronomical observations of the moon in conjunction with these 7 particular stars or star groups I mentioned. At no time does it rely on solar observations, quite different from many of those we heard in the first talk. The Borana year is a 12 lunar synodic month, that's 29.5 days long, and a year of 354 days. Now, obviously, there's a discrepancy of 10 days there, 10, 11. Doesn't correspond to the seasons, but this may not be important because in the tropics, it's so close to the equator. There are 27 day names, there are no weeks, and since each month is either 29 or 30 days long, the first 2 or 3 day names are used twice in the same month. And here you just see some of the month names, and they correlate, say, Bitotessa to Triangulum. The first ones are all to the star groups, and then the rest of the year, the second half of the year, is to do with phases of the moon. This will become apparent in the next slide. So how does this calendar work? The new year begins with the most important astronomical observation of the year, a new moon in conjunction with Beta Triangulum. Here is the new, up here. Here's the moon, and Triangulum is just coming up on the horizon. The day is called Bitotessa, and the next month is Bitokara. So the next month starts when the new moon is found in conjunction with the Pleiades. And so the Pleiades start rising. The third month starts with a new moon observed in conjunction with Aldebaran, the fourth with Bellatrix, the fifth in the area between central Orion and Scythe, and the sixth with the star Sirius. So you hear the sequence going like this, and slowly these rise in the sky, and it's all correlated to that and the position of the stars in the sky. 6 months, first 6 months of the year of the calendar are started by the astronomical observation of the new phase moon found in conjunction with six specific locations in the sky marked by 7 stars or star groups. The method is now switched, and the final 6 months identified by, as I mentioned, the 6 different phases of the moon, from full to crescent, being found in conjunction with only one position in the sky, and that's with Triangulum, which is now, Thus, the whole Borana calendar is identified astronomically, and when the new phase moon is again finally seen in conjunction with Beta Triangulum, the new year will start again. And since there are only 12 such synodic months, or 29.5 days, the Borana year is only 354 days long. So a very unusual calendar compared to most that we are familiar with. Next slide, please. And now I want to move on briefly to the Dogon people. Stay there. The Dogon live in southeast Mali in a region termed the Vallée de Bandigara, this region, along the Bandigara escarpment and in the plain of Senegambian, the latter extending into Burkina Faso. The area is delineated by a large rocky plateau in the west, and the escarpment is several hundreds of meters high, extending about 250 kilometers in a roughly northeast-southwest direction, and an extensive sandy plain to the east. Dogon people also live outside Dogon territory in large Malinese conurbations, such as Mopti and Bamako, and also in Ghana, Ivory Coast, and France. However, all these people identify themselves as Dogon, even though there may be wide cultural differences. Next, please. The spectacularly located Dogon settlements on the eastward-facing cliffs are well known. The cliff of Bandiagara is a World Heritage Site, added in 1989. The Dogon themselves are today one of the most intensively researched ethnic groups on the African continent, and have resulted in more than 1,800 publications. But they are best known for their elaborate cosmogony, their animist beliefs, astronomical knowledge, their masked dances, wooden sculpture, and their picturesque villages perched on the flanks of the cliffs. And you have seen some examples of the houses 100 years apart. The Dogon are subsistence farmers in an unfavorable arid environment, and the restricted arable ground is intensively worked. Mainly they farm millet, maize, and onions, and they have some domestic animals they keep for meat supply. The extended family is the basis of Dogon social organization. The Dogon are patrilineal, patrilocal, and exogamous. Next, please. We're going to talk about the Dogon and Sirius, which I'm sure some of you are you familiar with the Sirius mystery and thing? It was in the late 1930s that 4 Dogon priests, you see at the top here, shared their most important secret tradition with the 2 French anthropologists, Marcel Grial and Germain Dieterlen. It spent an apprenticeship of 15 years living with the tribe. These were the secret myths about the star Sirius, which is 8.6 million light years from Earth. They published their findings in a rather curious and enigmatic document in 1950 called Un Système Soudanais de Sirius. They claimed that the Dogon knew stars that were invisible without a telescope, specifically 2 companions to the dog star Sirius, which astronomers today call Sirius B and Sirius C. Their claims have given rise to a minor industry of speculation about how true the document is, and if it is true, how is this rationally possible? How did the Dogon come by this knowledge? The oral tradition says it was given to them by the Nomo, and this has been interpreted by many people ranging from these were ancient Egyptian priests or even aliens and spaceships landing in the lakes. There are also some very other, even more fanciful accounts than these. Next, please. That one. Initially, the anthropologists discounted this, publishing this information, and mainly because they didn't appreciate the astronomical importance of the information. What they didn't know was that since 1844, astronomers had suspected that Sirius A had a companion star. This was in part determined when it was observed that the path of the star wobbled. In 1862, Alvin Clark discovered the second star, making Sirius, going around Sirius, was a binary star system. There's 2 stars. In the 1920s, it was determined that Sirius B, the companion of Sirius B, was a white dwarf star. White dwarfs are small, dense stars that burn dimly. The pull of its gravity causes Sirius's wavy movement. Sirius B is smaller than planet Earth. The Dogon name for Sirius B here is Potolo. It means star. Tolo is star, and Po means smallest seed. Seed refers to creation. By this name, they describe the sea star's smallness. It is, they say, the smallest thing there is. They also claim that it is the heaviest star and is white in color. The Dogon thus attributes to Sirius B the 3 principal properties as a white dwarf of a white dwarf: small, heavy, and white. Now here's the most fascinating bit, is their unique 50-year calendar is based on the rotation cycle of Sirius B, which encircles the primary Sirius A every 49.9 or 50 years. 50-year cycle matches that. Next, please. I now want to quite quickly go through Senegambian. We've moved to West Africa now, below the Sahel. These circles comprise a vast sacred landscape of large groups of laterite stone circles that represent an extraordinary concentration of over 1,000 monuments in a band 100 kilometers wide and some 350 kilometers of the River Gambia. They reflect a prosperous, highly organized, and lasting society of unknown origin. The area covers some 15,000 square miles between Saloum and the Gambia rivers, and there are hundreds of circles containing many curious features, in particular the V or lie-shaped stones. I'll show you an example in a minute. The commonest shape is round with a pillar with a flat top. Others are square, some taper upwards. There are small stones with a cup-shaped hollow on the top, and there may or may not be stones in them. The 4 groups we're going to just scan across are Sini, Ngayeni, and Wana, and Wasu and Kobach. And they comprise 93 stone circles with numerous tumuli, burial mounds, some of which have been excavated to reveal material that suggests dates between the 3rd century and the 16th century AD. Very little has been done to discover the history behind these archaeological finds, although there are a number of studies. Next, please. It's now a World Heritage Site, or these 4 groups of stones are. And they also recommend including the quarries and many more surveys and studies being done. But nowhere are there mention of astronomical alignments. And this is just a complete huge area to be looked at. So we're going to look at Kobach and Wasu in Gambia and Siningayeni and Wana in Senegal. The Gambia has them on their stamps. Next, please. We'll look first at the ancient stone circles at Wasu in the Gambia. These were quarried with iron tools and skillfully shaped into almost identical cylindrical or polygonal 7-ton pillars, on average about 2 meters high, 7 tons, 2 meters high. Each circle contains between 8 and 14 pillars and is 4 to 6 meters across. And all are located near burial mounds, so there's definitely a correlation between afterlife rituals. The smaller stones placed on top of the monoliths are much later. Remember, we saw some earlier. Next, please. Here you see some of the stone circles at Wasu. That's the general outline of the area. Next, please. These are the stone circles at Kobach. And here you can see this V-shaped lyre stone. And nobody knows what these are. I'm sure many of you have some ideas of sighting and things. Next, please. The only bit of work I could find on alignments was done by Paul Devereux, who did some experiments. I don't know if he visited there, but he found that there are no apparent meaningful central alignments, but they're not, the circles themselves are not random. There's some parallel lines. There are edge alignments, as you can see along there. And there are various triangles that you can make here. Now, there isn't underlying geometry in the design, but as I say, nobody has done any real alignment on the ground. Next, please. The Ngayeni stones are slightly better studied. They've been studied by the University of Michigan, who aim to investigate the structure and dynamics of the cultural landscape generally along the Petit Bolong drainage in south-central Senegal. Their archaeological research aims to understand and explain the diversity of megalithic features, their patterning of clustering and aggregation, as well as their relationship with inhabited and craft production sites. But I didn't find much in the literature relating to astrological alignments. Astronomical alignments. Next, please. And these are the stones at Wana, which are also interesting because they have these cross pieces which we saw from Polynesia. Next, please. Now going to just 2 slides on the Borana megaliths. Next, please. Next, please. 70 groups of megaliths lie to the east of the town and the north and the east. Next, back one, please. Boa is over there. Huge stones, up to 2 meters high, but some can be 5 meters tall, weigh 4 tons, and virtually nothing is known about these. Next, please. However, I did come across, next, some work by Anders Collins, who, on a map exercise, took the furthest points of Africa, east and west, and north and south, and on the intersection, he discovered, oh, wonderful, you've got megaliths in Central African Republic. He had also found that there was a cave in Britain, Kent's Cavern, which has a face and a map, and these match almost the alignments of these. And Nicholas David, in 1982, carbon dated the site of Batuma of the Bois in 3140 to 3110 BC. Anders Collins believes that the face of the man in Kent's cavern Torquay clearly shows a map of Africa inscribed on it and shows how Africa was surveyed in about 3170 BC. He did his mapping on a Mercator projection. Now, you can make your own minds up about this. Next slide, please. But I decided to plot the same data on a Peters map projection, which actually is the true projection of the world and not the Mercator. And something very interesting happens here is that the center point moves out of this country into Cameroon. So I started looking around in Cameroon. Next, please. And came across the work of Dr. Etienne Zangato, who's done a whole series of work on a 14-year study on the megalithic sites of northwest Central African Republic and the east of Cameroon. And he says these were the only geographical zones in Central Africa to have important concentrations of megalithic monuments. In actual fact, that other map falls bang in the middle of there. Next, please. I'll come to the final bit of my talk, where I'm just going to briefly talk about Great Zimbabwe, and then I'm going to wrap up. In 1970, a study by P. Garlake listed some 50 archaeological sites between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers in southern Africa, which were comparable in terms of the structure of their bonded stone walls and the use of domestic space to the Great Zimbabwe ruins, which you see here. Now, I camped in these when I was a student, 3 nights. There were no guards, there were no tourist huts, there was nothing. It was just rocks on the hills. Most memorable night. So in this section, I will look at Great Zimbabwe itself, as well as some of these other 50 ruins. I'll only look at Kami, Nalatali, and Ziwa because they show progression of advancement and development. The first 2 are World Heritage Sites. The name Zimbabwe comes from the Shona word, means stone houses. Great Zimbabwe is the greatest medieval city in sub-Saharan Africa. It provides evidence that ancient Africa reached a level of civilization and architectural ingenuity not suspected by earlier scholars. However, many scholars still find it hard to believe that Africans could have built it or that it could have been a celestial observatory. When I was in my 20s, the prevailing paradigm is this was either built by Arabs or Chinese or somebody else, and impossible it could have been built by Africans. But the pioneering works of David Randall McIver, corroborated since by numerous finds of dated archaeological artifacts and by carbon-14 analysis, have proved that Great Zimbabwe was founded in the 11th century on a site which had been sparsely inhabited in the prehistoric period by a Bantu population of the Iron Age. In the 14th century, this city was the religious and temporal capital of the Munhumutapa Empire and extended over a very gold-rich plateau. Gold was a major commodity of trade. It comprised 10,000 to 20,000 people, and it dominated a realm which stretched across eastern Zimbabwe and into Botswana, Mozambique, and South Africa. In 1450, or about there, this capital was abandoned, not as a result of war, but because the hinterland could no longer furnish food for the overpopulated city, and deforestation made it necessary to go further and further to find firewood. That sounds very familiar to what one reads in South America. Next, please. It covers 60 acres, the whole site, and includes 3 separate complexes built of granitic stones. First, there's a series of high walls, labyrinthine passages, steps, and corridors, now known as the Acropolis, and I think astronomical alignments from this point could be very, very interesting, because that's where the Zimbabwe birds came from. Second is a large elliptical enclosure known as the temple and various other things. You see it over there, a complex of buildings there. And in between them, the ruins are smaller buildings known as the valley ruins, which means I haven't got a clue what they were. There. Next, please. The Acropolis is generally considered a royal city. The west enclosure is thought to have been the residence of successive chiefs, and the east enclosure, where 6 steatite upright posts topped with birds were found, considered to serve a ritual purpose. I went to a conference last year, and his name's escaped me, but he gave a talk on the Cygnus mystery, and he showed that in the northern hemisphere, birds are on high poles where the shamans used to climb up the pole and the bird used to carry them into the other world. There are also objects like this on temples in South America, Central and South America, which are star and rising alignments. And I think that these birds actually weren't just totems at all, but from the little we know about where they were situated, they weren't regularly spaced, they were rather irregularly spaced. And I think going back and looking at that may pay a lot of... Right, next please. That's just a picture of the walls. What's interesting is a very tight fit. There's no mortar at all, and the walls are slightly sloping to allow the camera to go. And next, please. These are the Kami ruins, and you can see the building materials have improved now. This is 15 kilometers west of Bulawayo and was the capital seat of the Towa dynasty between the 15th and 17th centuries. And it was built by refugees from the collapsing Munhumatapa Empire of Great Zimbabwe, some 250 kilometers away. The Towa state was in turn succeeded by the Rosvi kings, who became established at other important stone-walled settlements, including those at Naliteli and Danamombe, near modern Gweru. The power of the Rosvi was eventually eroded in the Nguni incursions from the south during the early 19th century, when the Ndebele, led by Msilikasi, who himself was pushed by Shaka Zulu, arrived in the 1830s. After that, the citadel was held as a royal preserve, a sacred ground and secret place, hidden from prying European eyes, until 1893, when Lobengula fled from advancing settler columns. It was left exposed to the legalized looters of the Rhodesia Ancient Ruins Company. Next, this is Nalatali. The Towa state improved upon the architectural, material, cultural Great Zimbabwe, and is one of 3 sub-states that evolved in the area. It's rated as far more articulate, or the most articulate of Zimbabwe's 150 walled ruins. A simple architecture on a remote hilltop enjoys a commanding view across the hills, plains, koppies of Somabula Flats. The main features, the decorated wall, exhibit the 5 primary decorative patterns found in Zimbabwe: chevrons, checkers, somewhere there, cords, herringbones, and ironstone. The original wall was topped by 9 plinths, but only haphazardly constructed ones remain. I think that's significant, are these 9 plinths. What did they have? Were these star markings? Nearly the end. Next one, please. This is Ziwa, a less sophisticated one up in the mountains, quite a different type of material. This is granite, much harder to work, and but even then, some of the working is very fine. Next. Now I want to come on to something, 2 or 3 slides before I sum up. Dean Leprini of Cape Town says there is a sacred light grid that surrounds Table Mountain. There's a network of sacred springs, caves, stone giants, and geometrically aligned market stones. Some of these have anthropomorphic faces, much of what we saw in the first talk, and their eyes are aligned to interact with the cardinal directions of the sun, the summer and winter solstices, and the spring and autumn equinoxes. By following the pathways of the sun through the eyes of ancient peoples, he believes that we can discover the antiquity of the human spirit and the interconnectedness of all things. It's a fascinating thing that he has found there. As a botanist traveling extensively in the Southern Cape, I often saw the sun and the moon appearing through these anthropomorphic faces in the landscape and never really thought much about it. He does bring quite a New Age tinge into it. The scale and magnitude of the profiles and observatories cover an area of 800 kilometers long, are monumental and proportional, and seem to defy explanation. There are more than 100 observatories, each in perfect astronomical alignment, and have been recorded over this vast area. Research of archaeological and historical archives suggests that ancient Stone Age man, Bushman, Khoi, Hottentots, San, Khoikhoi, and Strandloper peoples who lived in and around these sites had a cosmological belief system and most probably interacted with the pathways of the sun. The Khoikhoi recognized various star constellations. When the Pleiades were seen rising over the eastern horizon, for example, it signaled the coming of rains. They were also seen to go out and pray at sunrise and to celebrate the new moon by dancing and singing. The cosmological belief systems involving the movements of the sun, moon, and stars of these ancient inhabitants of South Africa is also in line with other ancient civilizations globally who all shared a deep interest in astronomy or astrology in some form of cosmological pattern. My final two slides are the ruins of the ancient city of Aksum, found close to Ethiopia's northern border. They mark the location of the heart of ancient Ethiopia. This was when the kingdom of Aksum was the most powerful state between the Eastern Roman Empire and Persia. They are massive ruins. They date between the 1st and 13th century AD, and they include monolithic obelisks, giant stelae, royal tombs, and the ruins of ancient castles. Long after its political decline in the 10th century, Ethiopian emperors continued to be crowned at Aksum. Here is among the most important of the roughly 160 archaeological sites discovered so far in the Soda region south of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. There are over 36 monuments, including 32 carved stelae covered with symbols, most of which are difficult to decipher. They are remains of an ancient Ethiopian culture whose age has not been precisely determined. Next, please. These are very large megaliths. Next, please. My final stone picture. This is in Morocco. This is an area comprised of 167 megaliths surrounding a tumulus of almost 55 meters of diameter. The largest stone is 5 meters tall. Next, please. It raises the question, given that there are vast numbers of megalithic sites in Africa, is there any correlation, for example, in the Tree of Life map or the planetary grid system? So these are some of the maps. I learned from Hugh that this map is now out of date, but what I do notice is most of the megalithic sites occurred over here, up in this part of the world, down this part of the world, over here, and up there. So I leave that for discussion because I know nothing about it. Right. I now draw some conclusions. Final slide. African archaeoastronomy and cultural astronomy is in its infancy. There's a lot of unsubstantiated speculation and not enough thorough on-the-ground study. Afrocentric and Eurocentric clashes have also created some confusion. I've shown you a range of different megalithic and later astronomical sites from around Africa, primarily because they are so little known and virtually unstudied. They are also a reminder to us interested in ancient wisdom to take a global view of the past whenever we can, to search for the universal principles that underlie our ancestors' attempts to understand and master time and space. Future studies need to consider Africans' oral traditions in designing studies, and I think a different approach to Africa has to be undertaken to many other parts of the world. Sub-Saharan Africa has left so little written records that it's easy to forget or ignore its wisdoms. Africa has focused much of its cosmology and wisdom within the oral tradition. This tradition is now being recognized to be as rich and as deep as anything else from around the world. It was only in the late 1970s that the first great African epic poems that will beat anything from Europe have started to be written down, and they are stunning in their complexity and depth. Much work needs to be done on African megaliths, and new types of studies need to be developed, such as Musa Galal's 1992 monograph on stars, seasons, and weather in the Somali pastoral tradition. This is an extraordinary monograph on Somali oral traditions linking stars, seasons, and weather in Somali pastoral tradition. Finally, I hope I've excited and encouraged some of you to become active in helping, support, document, or facilitate the study of African megalithic sites before they are lost or destroyed. Every encouragement, help, and training should be given to Africans to understand this vital work. And my last slide is the Milky Way in southern Africa. On a dark night, this is a deeply primeval experience. Anyone looking at these skies would be deeply stirred. So let us reflect. It was here in Africa that our ancestors first gazed at the heavens and pondered the mysteries of the cosmos. Surely we need to contemplate the astronomic heritage of humanity's home continent before it is all lost.
This has been a Megalithomania audio production. For more information, visit megalithomania.co.uk.